Hi there, welcome to Mark Kinnan's channel, where this week we are talking about the bajo quinto. Now, bajo means low in Spanish and quinto means five. Five sets of strings, bajo quinto. But is it a guitar or is it a bass? Or a bit of both? Let's take a look and find out. Now that was a little bit of norteño music. Bajo quinto and norteño are like brothers. They go hand in hand. They're synonymous with each other. It is the basis of a norteño band. So what is norteño? Norteño in Spanish means north, or from the north. So norteño refers to the northern part of Mexico, but also includes the southern parts of the United States, like southern part of California, Arizona, Texas, and so forth. And it is basically a catch-all phrase that includes things like conjunto music, corridos, rancheras. Rancheras, basically country music. People like Pedro Infante and Vicente Fernandez, who sadly died actually today, I just heard the news, are huge proponents of rancheras. But it is a massively popular, it's a huge genre of music. Bands like Los Tigres del Norte, these guys are huge. This is probably the biggest band in that genre. But also Los Tucanes de Tijuana, Intocable, Tercer Elemento, a kind of a newer, taking the music in a slightly newer direction. Very cool band, check them out. Norteño bands generally consist of bajo quinto and accordion being the most two important ingredients in the group. Then a bass player, and then drums. Sometimes it's a drum kit, sometimes it's a drummer and then a snare player separately, or a cymbal player. And then also vocals, or a trumpet, or a saxophone, or some other instrument, guitar sometimes. But it is not to be confused with banda. Here is a clip of banda. I'm sure you know this sound. Whereas banda will consist of, again, some variant of percussion, a bass player sometimes, but usually bass is handled by tuba or euphonium. Blom, 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 you know, that oompa thing. And then you have usually three, not slide trombones, but usually valve trombones, which is why you get that very bright, punchy, wide vibratoed sound that is so unique to banda music. And then four clarinets usually, and then three trumpets. Usually they have a singer, and sometimes they'll have a guitar too. Sometimes a saxophone. Depends. It's not always the same. You know, but these genres are fluid. Artists like Jenny Rivera, for example, has, you know, done a lot of banda, a lot of norteño, as well as a lot of mariachi music. Pepe Aguilar is another one. People who straddle these different genres. And the bajo quinto is usually playing the one, or the offs. If you're doing, they might just be going, because they have a bass player who's playing that. In times gone by, when norteño was really formulating itself as a genre, you've less frequently found a bass guitar, and the bajo quinto player had to do that. But there is also another instrument called a bajo sexto. Now, very often people will confuse the two. They're interchangeable, it seems, in terms of terminology. But a bajo sexto is exactly this instrument, but with one more pair of strings lower than this A, so it actually goes down to E. And so when they started adding bass guitars, I think people found that they needed the bajo sexto less, and the bajo quinto has become much more of a popular instrument. Now, what is it? So, it looks like a guitar, but the similarities sort of end with the looks and the form. Firstly, it has 10 strings. It has 5 pairs of strings. And on the lowest 2 pairs, the strings are an octave apart. So, let me show you. This here is an A. Now, that's the same A that you will find on your regular 6-string guitar, the second to last, or the second to lowest string. You get a low E on a 6-string guitar. This would be the A. But now the next string here is an A, an octave below that. So that's much more like a bass guitar. Then the next one up is a D. That would be the same D you have on your sixth string. And then here's the D, an octave below that. So the two of them together, it's a nice thick sound. And here's the two A's together. I mean, it's meaty. The next one up is a G, both in the same octave. Then we get a C, again, both in the same octave. Then we get an F, both in the same octave. Now you will notice all the strings are a fourth apart. So that's one big difference between a six string guitar, which is going to have a third between the G and the B string. This one doesn't, it's all fourths. It's more like a quattro and various other instruments, all tuned in fourths. So it's just, it's just a powerful sound. And here, let me play a chord for you. Beautiful, amazing sound. It's a unique sound. It's a unique instrument. Now, because of all this tension, you've got a lot of strings. You've got almost twice the amount of strings. There's a lot of tension in this instrument. And therefore, it is thicker than your average six string is going to be. And the bracing inside is going to be different. And the bridging is different. As is the neck. The neck is also much thicker. And that is what makes this instrument difficult to play. It's not... your hands have to be really, really strong, and it helps to have bigger hands. Actually, the playing of norteño can really all be achieved by two chord positions. This one, which includes a dominant seventh, and then this position here, and here's its dominant seventh. Now you can get minor 2, you can get a major 7th. In fact, here's the major 7th. Here would be the minor. So really, between those two positions, you can really cover the majority of norteño music. But what makes this instrument hard is how thick and how much power it takes to press these chords. It doesn't help that this particular Baja Quinto is a little bit, the neck is a little bent. So you get a little more buzzing than I should be getting. It doesn't have a tress rod, this particular Baja Quinto. Most of the modern ones do. A good workman always blames his tools. This Baja Quinto, by the way, is a Candela Baja Quinto, a guy locally here in Los Angeles who makes all sorts of guitars, classical guitars mostly. I actually bought this Baja Quinto for using in a documentary I did called Dolores, about Dolores Huerta. Here is a little bit of that. So what I want to do in this video is sort of illustrate more the cultural context and the historical context of this instrument. There are a ton of YouTube videos about how to play this instrument, and I urge you to go and look at them. But there really aren't any that deal with the sort of historical context of this instrument. So where does this instrument come from? Where did it first appear? Well, the first time this instrument really appears is the early 19th century, 1820s, 30s, something like that. And it wasn't in the northern parts. It actually appears in the more southern central states of Oaxaca, Guerrero, Michoacan, Puebla, Tlaxcala, places like that. And it's a very different kind of music. It still exists today, but it's a much smaller thing than it has grown to be norteño. Let me play what that might sound like. Well, first thing to note, it's in a minor key. The majority of norteño is in a major key. Next thing to note is it's very often not played with a pick, it's played with fingers. In fact, it's known also as the bajo mixteco. So in order to trace how this became an instrument synonymous with norteño music in the northern part of Mexico, let's set the stage. We're in 1850s, something like that, in Mexico, and the seat of power, political power and economic power, is in the southern part of Mexico. Mexico City, Veracruz, Puebla. And what had happened is in 1846 to 1848 was the Mexican-American War. And Mexico lost over 50% of its territory to America in that war, including California, Arizona, New Mexico, Texas. It's unbelievable. People forget that was not much more than 150 years ago that a modern country lost over half its territory to another invading country. It's crazy. Very, very naughty of you, America. So what was happening in the northern states of Mexico and what now became the southern part of the United States, it was very agrarian. There was no real political seat of power there. The economy was all agriculture, and it was poor. But a lot of immigrants were settling there. In both parts, the southern United States and northern parts of Mexico. A lot of Germans, a lot of Polish, a lot of Czechoslovakians. And so that's the first clue, which we'll come back to in a bit. And then what you have in 1858 is Mexico elects its first indigenous president, Benito Juarez. And they are immediately challenged by not only their own Republican conservative forces, but also the French, who are not quite yet done with the whole empire idea. So they're like, let's have a last go at this. And then in 1862 or 3, they advance from Veracruz, land in Veracruz, and advance towards the capital in Mexico City. And there's a big battle in Puebla. And eventually Benito Juarez flees the capital. Now the French immediately set about installing an emperor, as one does. Maximilian I, he was Austrian. And Maximilian immediately sets about actively encouraging immigration into Mexico, predominantly from German, Polish, Czechoslovakian communities. French as well, Austrian too. But the German part of that will become important in a second. Poor old Benito Juarez, in the meantime, has fled the capital with his government in exile, and he's gone to what was then just El Paso. And now that they drew a border through it because the United States won that war, they called the southern part of that Juarez, named it after him. But he soon ended up settling in Chihuahua with his government in exile. And what that did is it started bringing to the northern part of Mexico more than just agriculture, more than just an agrarian existence. It started bringing political and real economic power and development to the northern parts of Mexico. Now, he was only there a couple of years in Chihuahua before he finally managed to regain his political power and went back to the capital. But it set the precedent. And so a lot of the influence of norteño music is coming from the German Oompa music from southern Bavaria, and is coming from the polkas and the mazurkas and the waltzes. And all these things are injecting their musical literature into this new music that has been formed called norteño. And you can really hear it in banda, where you have this tuba going bum 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 bum. It's crazy. In anywhere Germans have emigrated to, we have the same thing in South Africa. We have a thing called boere music. It's farmers' music. Same thing. Low bum 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 151515. And of course, the accordion comes directly from that world too. I mean, who else makes a better accordion than the Germans, you know? So accordion has become the rock guitar of norteño, really, and of banda. And through all of this, the bajo quinto, coming from its very, very humble roots, has now become an instrument of the virtuoso. And there are, any number of amazing players around now who are really, stars in their own right. And the other thing to notice is that even before Benito Juarez, even before Maximilian, political leaders in Mexico were always actively promoting military style marching band music. This started out in central southern Mexico and subsequently ended up spreading around the whole country. But there is a very strong tradition of marching band music that was always about patriotism, and that is the direct descendant of banda. Banda is exactly that music, just sexed up. Now, the corridos are also a function of patriotism in Mexico. Corridos really start appearing in the 1810s, during the Mexican War of Independence, when corridos were used to tell stories, usually about soldiers or about villains and so it was a story being told through music. So in 1910, during the Mexican Revolution, the corridos really went into overdrive because suddenly you had these anti-heroes like Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, who were revolutionary leaders turned into generals. So these corridos would basically sing about the exploits of these revolutionary leaders. But cut to today, and the narco corrido is where it's at. It is huge. Narco corridos are massively popular. And these are corridos that are written to glorify drug lords. And this is actually banned in Mexico, banned on the for radio station play. But in the United States, it is a huge business. And much like rap was in the gangster rap was in the 90s, glorifying drug lords and things like that. But what is unique about narco corridos is, this is in a major key. This is in 3/4 time. This is a waltz. This is based on a polka. This is based on a mazurka. It's got an accordion. It's got a bajo quinto. And then they're singing about these horrible deeds that these narco traffickers are getting up to. So did the bajo quinto just magically appear out of thin air in 1820, 30, wherever it was? No, probably not. Like all instruments, it developed through a process of osmosis. So where might it have come from? Just take a look at this. Here is a chitarra battente, which is an Italian guitar from the 16th century. At first glance, you may think, well, that's not really similar at all. But take a closer look. There are 5 sets of strings, 2 strings in each set. Also tuned, albeit not with the lower octave like the bajo quinto is, but it is also tuned starting at a low A, going up to a D, going up to a G. But here it's different. Instead of going up to the C next, like the bajo quinto does, this one goes up to the B and then goes up to the E, which you might notice is exactly what a 6-string guitar is tuned to. Now, the chitarra battente was just a version of the Baroque guitar, which came a little bit before that. The Baroque guitar, again, has the same system of strings. Sometimes only 1 string is used at the top, but they had gut strings, and they had gut frets, which are movable frets. So you could actually take a fret and move it up and down a bit, so you could micro-tune. Very cool. I don't know why we lost that concept. But the Baroque guitar was ubiquitous in Europe in the 16th and 17th centuries. I mean, it was everywhere, and it is the father of the modern guitar. Here is a Mateo Salas guitar from around 1630 to 1650-ish. Beautiful instrument. Here is a very interesting specimen. This is the Sabionari guitar from 1679. It is the only Baroque guitar that survives from that era that is still playable. And it was made by none other than Antonio Stradivari. Yeah, that guy. The guy who made all the violins that you still find being played today that are worth millions and millions of dollars. But even the Baroque guitar had a predecessor. And that was called the Renaissance lute from around the 13th century. It was, again, very popular. Now, we're getting further away from the bajo quinto, but it is important to note that there is a lineage here. The Renaissance lute, albeit with a bent neck, still had double strings, but even the Renaissance lute came from somewhere, and that was from the oud, from thousands of years before that, in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq and Iran. But perhaps the most relevant guitar of all of these to our discussion is the Spanish vihuela. Now, that was sort of developing around the same time as the Baroque guitar, Renaissance lute. It is believed it was influenced by the invasion of the Moors, but it is again a 5 or 6 course guitar. In other words, it's got 5 or 6 pairs of strings. And the vihuela goes back even before the Baroque guitar. It goes back hundreds of years before that. So in Spain, it was, obviously incredibly popular, and the modern day flamenco music definitely has its roots in the Spanish vihuela. And it is extremely likely that the Spanish vihuela made its way to Mexico in droves. Not to be confused with the Mexican vihuela, which is widely used in mariachi music. It's a round-backed instrument. It really has very little to do with the Spanish vihuela. And so, historically, we don't really know exactly who decided to take what instrument and change it to what, when, but it's like investigative work. You can kind of see, based on the similarities, where the train of development and osmosis likely came from. Now, the Bajo Quinto, synonymous with norteño music as it is, that's not all you can play on this instrument, and it's a lot of fun to experiment with it. For example, or a little bossa. So that's about it for the Bajo Quinto. This is an incredibly important instrument in Mexican music. It's right up there with the trumpet, and the guitar, and it is just ubiquitous in norteño music. You've probably seen this a million times and not even realized it. I hope I was able to shed some light on the history of this instrument and how it became integral in the development of norteño music. I'm also going to do an artist profile and sit down with a real Bajo Quinto player in Mexico and really pick his brain about the instrument and the intricacies of playing this instrument and the repertoire of norteño music. If you'd like to check out some YouTube videos on this instrument and tutorials on how to play it, I have 3 recommendations for you. One is Luis Relampago. He's got a channel. The other one is Max Baca. He demonstrates a lot of Bajo Quintos and he's got a channel. And then the other one is El Magallanes, who's a younger guy but very interesting, sits down with a lot of Bajo Quinto players. Very cool stuff to check out. And it's been a lot of fun making this video. I love this instrument. Mexican music is like an onion. The more you peel it, the more you find out there is. It really is a very diverse culture of music in that country, as is its food and everything else. So I'll catch you on the next one. Thanks for watching and take it easy.